Hello, everybody. You're listening to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I'm your host. Today on Your Neighbor on the Left, we're going to be talking about a number of interesting topics in our Hot Topics portion of the show. We're going to discuss a little bit about President Trump's interview with ABC News. We're going to talk a little bit about his planned military parade. We're going to take a look at some of the details surrounding his contention that groceries, gas, and the economy are all doing far better than they were. And we're going to talk about perhaps my least favorite of the Trump administration characters, Stephen Miller, and his recent quote about kids and education. It was all over the news and all over social media and all over everywhere. I don't know if you happen to catch the entirety or any piece of the absolutely disastrous interview that President Trump had with Terry Moran, a reporter with ABC. But it was something. And, you know, as I watch these interviews that he does, these one-on-one interviews with prominent journalists, I can't help but wonder to myself why anyone that is working for him in his administration would ever allow him to do these, because he very rarely ever comes off as anything but bad in these interviews. And this one was of it was a particular disaster. And I'm not going to break down the entire interview, but there was two parts of it that were particularly insane. The first one, and the lesser of the two, deals with the copy of the Declaration of Independence that President Trump has hanging in the Oval Office. Now, the first thing to note about this is he talks about this copy of the Declaration of Independence as though he honestly believes it's the original. He talks about how it needs to be behind a curtain because it has to be protected from sunlight, and how it had been locked in a vault for hundreds of years. And then he even goes on with other nonsense about, you know, did Joe Biden even ever think to do this? And I mean, I can't say whether or not any other president has ever thought to do it. I don't believe any other president has ever done it. You know, as far as it goes, I mean, hanging a copy, which is what it is, a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the Oval Office is all fine and well. But, you know, for one, he uses it as a prop, which, you know, that's not anything unusual. He points it out to everybody, and he talks about how wonderful he is for having it placed in the Oval Office. But in the interview with Terry Moran, at one point when they focus on this decoration in his office, Moran asks him, "What does the Declaration of Independence mean to you?" And in response to that question, Trump replied the following: "Well, it means exactly what it says. It's a declaration of unity and love and respect, and it means a lot. And it's something very special to our country." So I'll start off with the part where he's right. It is indeed a declaration. It does indeed say it's a declaration. As far as the rest of it, I'm not sure what document he's talking about, but the Declaration of Independence was written to the government of King Charles, who the colonies wanted to rebel against. And it was by no strange definition anything that could be connected to unity, love, and respect. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They didn't want to be united. They didn't have any love for the British government, and they weren't really showing respect by telling them to go get bent. It makes one wonder if he's ever actually even read the Declaration of Independence. He certainly doesn't seem to understand it. And the more disturbing part about that is it doesn't ever seem to faze his supporters. If you talk about him being a person who exhibits non-Christian behaviors, they say, God picks evil people to do his work sometimes too. If you point out that he doesn't appear to be the sharpest knife in the drawer, they say, we didn't elect him because he's a genius. We elected him because he cares about us. If you haven't seen the interview and you have an opportunity to go and look it up online, which I encourage you to do, the look on Terry Moran's face when he gives this answer is priceless. I mean, talk about a guy who wasn't able to hide what he was thinking. Moran has a look on his face of sheer disbelief. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about in this particular interview, which I think is much more important, is there's a portion of the interview where Moran brings up the now infamous photo of the hand of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And this is the picture that shows the 4 images tattooed against the back of his fingers with the letters MS13 superimposed above them. Now, when I first saw this picture, I took it the way I think most people took it, was that it was a photo of his hand depicting the tattoos, and then someone had added, with Photoshop or something similar, the MS13 above each finger to denote that the image on his index finger, which I believe was a marijuana leaf, signified M. And then as you go through the other 3 fingers, each picture represented S, 1, and 3, respectively. After listening to all the talk about this for so long, I'm not even sure if that was really the intent of the person who put those superimposed letters and digits on there. Because I guess you have to accept the possibility that perhaps this really poorly done photo edit wasn't just meant to be like a key to the pictures on the fingers, but actually supposed to convince people that it was part of the tattoo. I don't know anybody who's ever worked with even the simplest photo editing software would look at this and know that they were superimposed, but apparently the president isn't one of those people. He got into a debate with Moran about that part of the picture. And I will say, to be honest, Moran didn't do a really good job of explaining exactly what he saw in this picture. But it was clear that the president believes that the MS1 and 3 on that picture are actually part of the tattoos on the man's hand. And what Moran did was say, well, no, they're photoshopped. Now, if you want to be magnanimous about it, you could say that Trump believed he was inferring that everything on the hand, all of the images in the picture were photoshopped, and they're not. But Trump would not let it go. Moran started to try to move on to the next subject, which, for a reporter who has the president of the United States in a real gotcha situation where he's actively arguing for a false proposition, Moran trying to move on was awfully generous, a little too generous for my taste. But the point is, the president wouldn't let it go. He kept talking about it and bringing it back and saying, pointing at his own knuckles and saying he has MS13 on his knuckles. And it like I said, Moran he mentioned that it was photoshopped, and he mentioned that the symbols are what what some people have identified as meaning MS-13. Had that been me sitting there, I would have been a little bit more specific and said, no, the pictures are part of the tattoo. The lettering was added after the fact, but I mean, Trump was dead set, and he was not going to change his mind. And, like I said, my first impression of this picture was that those numbers and letters were added for clarification. But I mean, who knows at this stage of the game? There's no shortage of incredible nonsense that comes out of the White House at this point. So I guess you can't automatically discount the idea that it was added on there haphazardly and that they just thought people would believe it was part of the tattoo. However, whoever else they managed to fool, they certainly managed to fool the president. And as I said at the beginning of this segment, I can't imagine at this stage of the game why they let him do one-on-one interviews with people. In a press conference, he can jump to the next reporter. They have a habit of putting a lot of friendly faces in the press gaggles and the press room, and a one-on-one interview doesn't give him any wiggle room when he steps into a hole like the one he did where these tattoos were concerned. Now, aside from that interview, if you've listened to things coming out of the White House, particularly from the president himself or his social media platforms, you've probably caught that he's letting everyone know that the price of eggs and gas are falling. In some cases, he says 2 points lower than they've ever been. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because it's blatantly not true. Let's talk about gas first. Trump had claimed last week that gas had fallen as low as $1.98 a gallon in a couple of states. Then he voiced a similar assertion on social media, saying gasoline just broke $1.98 a gallon, lowest in years. And it's absolutely not true. The nationwide average for a price of gas a gallon as of last week was $3.18. And this is from AAA. Now, you want to say, well, perhaps he's talking about one particular place, one particular state, but there is no state as of last week who was boasting an average price for gas in the state anywhere close to $1.98. And it should also be noted that the falling price of oil is not automatically a positive thing. A lot of times oil prices will fall because they're expecting an economic slowdown, and who can expect anything else right now while we're still up in the air on all these tariffs. But an economic slowdown usually means there's a diminish in energy demand, which then brings the price of oil down. Now, the president has said the same thing about groceries. He likes to say that the prices for groceries, a word that he has expressed a weird fascination with as an old-fashioned word, but he keeps saying they're going down. But they've gone up slightly every month since he's been in office. And when he claimed food prices are falling, Tucker Balch, who's a financial professor at Emory University, was quoted as saying, "I'm not aware of any data that supports that." And of course, as we've learned countless times, so much of what comes out of the president's mouth and the White House in general isn't based on data at all. Now, as far as eggs are concerned, this one is a little bit more interesting because in March, as of March, egg prices were 60% higher than the year prior. And of course, there's many things for that. There's, the bird flu has been a big thing in lifting prices. But the interesting thing here is that while the prices of eggs have risen and have not come down appreciably, wholesale egg prices have. That's the amount that grocers pay to suppliers. they've dropped significantly. And I'm not sure what to say as to why these drops in wholesale prices haven't translated immediately into relief for people buying eggs, us consumers. But there's reason to hope that they will come down. They just haven't yet, unless, of course, you're listening or reading the social media posts of the president. Now, for the sake of being fair, what he should have said, which would still, I guess be a positive, just not as positive as he wants it to be, is that they have stopped climbing as fast as they were, the prices. The price of oil has plummeted since he came into office about 25%. And this will, if everything goes as it normally goes, and these days, who can tell? But if it follows historical patterns, it means that the price of gas is going to drop because it's based on, it's connected to the price of oil. And the president has a birthday coming up, as you may know. June 14th will be President Trump's 79th birthday. And he's planning a real humdinger of a celebration, which will include a military parade. This idea about a parade first hit the news back in, I think it was early February, and things have been quiet about it for a while, I guess probably because there's such a deluge of other crazy stuff going on. But it's come up again, and there's some plans apparently being hashed out. From what I've been able to read, the parade will involve somewhere between 6,600 and 7,000 soldiers, tanks and infantry vehicles, helicopter flyovers, and parachute jumps. Now, that particular list came from ABC News. The expected cost of this celebration is reported to be around the $90 million mark. And what are we supposed to say about something like this? First of all, there's the picayune thing that, it's a 79th birthday, which is an odd one for such a big celebration. I mean, if it was the 80th birthday, maybe there'd be a smidge more logic to it. But, if this is the plan for 79, God knows what we're looking at for next year when he turns 80. But I mean, in a more practical sense, such a big deal has been made since he came into office about cutting spending, trimming, waste, fraud, and abuse. And, here we are looking at spending $90 million of taxpayer money, which, by the way, $90 million is almost exactly what the combined yearly budget is in terms of federal dollars for NPR and PBS, which he announced this week in a executive order that he's going to cut the funding for. So at least we know where the $90 million is going to come from on the budget. But either way, it's $90 million of taxpayer money that's going to be spent on a very odd optic, if I do say so myself. I mean, you don't normally see free countries under democracies that have military parades to celebrate their leader. It's the kind of thing that you normally see in North Korea and Russia and places of that nature. And moreover, it's nauseating to think that they're cutting money from services to veterans, and we have, how many homeless veterans and how many veterans who are on welfare and things like that because they can't manage to make ends meet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a military parade for the president. I will mention, in deference to one of my more conservative friends who pointed this out to me, it is also the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army on the same day, June 14th. And okay, that is certainly true. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to bet that when and if this thing happens, that the coverage of it will have sparing information at best on the anniversary of the Army as opposed to the birthday of the president. So now for the final hot take or hot topic for this episode, I want to talk a little bit about Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is quite a character, and I could do an entire episode on Stephen Miller, if for no other reason that he creeps the hell out of me. But this week, specifically, what I want to talk about is this press conference that he did at the White House, where he touched on education. And, I guess the best way to do it is to let you hear the clip, and then we'll go from there.
This administration is also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country. So these are a few of the areas in which President Trump has fought the cancerous communist woke culture that was destroying this country, where we were led to believe that men were women, that women were men, that racial discrimination was good, that merit was bad, and that safety and physical security mattered less than the feelings of liberal ideologues.
Where do I even begin with this? First, this sounds like something out of a bad movie. Or that's not even right. It's not something out of a bad movie. This sounds like something literally out of a speech from the 30s Germany. Literally. I mean, the word for what he's talking about is indoctrination. There's no other word that describes it better than that, because you have to remember when he lists off all these things, and I'm going to go through some of them here quickly. The question to ask yourself is who decides? Who decides what it means to love America when he says children will be taught to love America? Who decides what constitutes a patriot when children are taught to be patriots? Well, who decides what civic values are when he says children will be taught civic values? He talks about they're going to close the Department of Education, and we're going to make sure the funds that we give to the states do not promote communist ideology. I mean, this is batshit crazy. First of all, there isn't anybody who thinks that this administration has a grip on what socialism or communism actually mean, because the way they bandy it around makes it clear that they don't have a grasp on it, or they're willfully ignoring what the actual definitions of those terms are. And he goes on to say that for any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves. This, of course, goes back to the idea that the right believes that there are teachers in the classroom who are teaching kids to be gay or to be trans or so on and so forth. If you want to talk about who is more responsible for making kids hate who they are, wouldn't the finger best be pointed at the people who are disparaging the LGBT community and the trans community? And any kid who finds themselves in that situation is taught by the rhetoric that comes from the White House that they are broken and that they are less and that they should be ashamed of themselves. And we keep talking about CRT because in the right-wing mental picture of CRT, this means we're teaching white kids to hate themselves. And it's such a moronic way to look at things. For an administration who insists, at least outwardly that they want to get away from divisive things and racism and so on and so forth. The idea that you can even begin to do that while ignoring all the facts of the history of this country and the history of racism across the world, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous to think that they want to ignore all of these things for any other reason than the fact that they want people to forget about them, and not for the reasons that they're saying they want people to forget about them. He mentions woke culture as if anyone except people on the right actually use the word woke in general conversation. But he mentions woke culture, and he says, where we were led to believe that men are women and women are men, where racial discrimination was good and merit was bad. And this is such an absolute crock of nonsense. Again, it goes back to this fake theory that they're putting forth that kids are trans because they're taught to be trans. And this is what teachers are doing. I know teachers. I know quite a few teachers. And our teachers have their hands full trying to teach the kids the items in their lesson plan. There are not teachers out there who, on any sort of widespread level, are pushing their own agenda, whether their agenda is right, left, center, up, or down. And the idea that it's somehow racially biased rhetoric that kids are being taught in schools when you teach them about history is baloney. There's that old phrase out there, every accusation is a confession. It's never been more true than when we're talking about the right yelling about racism. They want to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is racist because getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion actually enables racism. And he actually throws in a line about how safety and physical security matter. I mean, this is coming from the side who has done absolutely, positively nothing to deal with school shootings. They will argue that the answer is definitely not gun control, to which I've always said, well, fine, then what is the answer? There is no answer coming from the right. In fact, recently, there was a new story about how they're cutting funding for mental health services for public schools. If there was anything that was even a head fake in the right direction as far as trying to deal with school shootings, it was better mental health services for students. But no, we're going to cut those too. And then I'm going to listen to Stephen Miller come out here at the podium and talk about how safety and physical security are very important. And I'm not supposed to just think that he's an absolute bald-faced liar. And then to tack on to this story, there's also a story going around about how there is a law in the Oklahoma legislature that would require schools to teach that the 2020 election was stolen. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the problem here. We have Stephen Miller saying that schools won't get funding if they don't teach what the administration wants them to teach. And then we have schools that are going to be told they have to teach a conspiracy theory. They have to teach a theory about the 2020 election that was proven over and over and over again in 79 or some number court cases that were filed to try and show that there was election fraud in the 2020 election, and every one of them was thrown out. Every single one of them. At this stage of the game, there is nothing out there factually to display that the 2020 election was in any way not safe and secure, but we're going to teach it. At least in Oklahoma, we're going to teach it to students, and we're going to call that patriotism, and we're going to call that, civic values. And I guess a lot of that explains why Oklahoma falls where it does on the list of states with poorer education. And let's not forget that another mantra from the right that you heard a lot more during the campaign than you do since is that they were all about states' rights. They want to put the power, especially for education, in the hands of the states. You would hear politicians say over and over again, we believe that the people of state X know more about what their kids need in the classroom than some folks do in Washington, D.C. And here we are now. We're saying that that's not the case. We are going to tell you what you need to be doing. And if you don't do it, you don't get the money. So whether you're on the left or the right or somewhere else, you have to be familiar with the term woke. 99% of the time, you're hearing it from a talking head on the right who's ranting and raving against wokeness or talking about a company being too woke. So I decided that for this episode's deep dive, we'd talk a little bit about woke, what it means in reality, what it means to the right, a little bit of the history behind it, and see what we can suss out. So, just for kicks and giggles, let's start off with a clip that's a compilation of some of the rhetoric from the right about the term woke. This is a compilation put together by the folks at Comedy Central.
Let me just start with this whole thing about woke. We all know what woke means.
Being woke means never having to say you're sorry.
Woke means never letting anyone say they're sorry.
Woke is racist.
Big woke means equity, diversification, gender, and racial disparities.
This wokeness that's happening at Madison's house and Jefferson's house, where all they do is talk about slavery.
Wokeism is about murdering fun.
You know what woke means? It means you're a loser.
Woke madness, now it's drag queens and children and church.
The woke is the new religion of the left.
The new hip woke is to not like the Jews.
What does it mean to be woke? I don't know what the definition of woke so much is. I do know that I think most people don't want to be lectured by companies.
I think it's safe to say that the term woke is one of the, if I'm being generous, most misunderstood, if I'm not being so generous, one of the most weaponized words in the American political landscape. Most of those clips that you heard were from Fox News. You've seen it on bumper stickers. If you're like me and you exist in the left half of reality, you've probably had it hurled at you like an insult at some point. But, what does it actually mean? And more importantly, why is the right so scared of it? So let's unpack it a little bit. First of all, a little history. The term woke didn't come from the liberal colleges that are trying to indoctrinate the youth. It didn't come from Twitter or social media at all. It originated in African American vernacular English. It has roots going back to the early 20th century. In black communities, to be woke meant to be awake to injustice, especially racial injustice. It originated as a call to stay alert, to stay conscious of the systems that were designed to oppress. It shows up in music, in literature, especially during the civil rights era. Now, fast forward to the 2010s, and you would see things like "Stay woke" as slogans on signs and associate it with Black Lives Matter. Woke wasn't about being politically correct. It was never about that in its original context. It was about being morally aware. So then the question is, how did the term that meant to be aware of social injustice turn into a punchline on the Sean Hannity show. Conservative media needed a new villain. It used to be that just hurling the word liberal around was enough of a perceived insult against the left, the perception of the base of the GOP, that it was good enough. But eventually the word liberal started to sort of lose its bite. And then woke became the catch-all slur. It was vague, it was emotional, and incredibly easy to weaponize, mostly because nobody really knew what it meant. And since everyone on the right who watched Fox News knew that, according to them, Black Lives Matter was a bad thing, so it suddenly then changed into anything and everything that conservatives didn't like was now going to be labeled woke. Teaching accurate history, that's woke. Supporting trans rights, that's woke. Environmental justice, woke. Anything associated with the pride, the LGBT pride, also woke. Literally anything and everything that didn't conform with the right's view of how things are supposed to be or how they are, it was termed as woke. And the question then is, why is the idea of wokeness such a trigger for intense backlash? And, my thought is it's all about fear. Fear of losing power, fear of losing control and dominance. Wokeness challenges systems, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, and asks people to reckon with a lot of uncomfortable truths about the way things actually are in the United States of America. In a more reality-based perspective, to be woke is to notice. To notice that maybe the systems that you benefit from are hurting others. To take notice that your version of history has left out a lot of people. That your religious freedom might be someone else's oppression. And that's a terrifying view to have, or it's a terrifying thing to take notice to if your worldview depends on denial. Denial that there's still racism. Denial that the systems that we have in this country aren't equal across the board. So instead of engaging with that discomfort, the reaction from the right is to mock it, to call it woke nonsense. That's usually the word that follows. They've turned awareness into a threat. And, they've convinced the base that woke is a bad thing because they know the more people that start, quote, waking up, the more likely the game is to change. And it's a game that they really are invested in. And this ties in with this whole campaign on the side of the right to eradicate diversity, equity, and inclusion measures. They tell us in their speeches and their rhetoric that getting rid of DEI is about making everything equal and not giving anyone an unfair preference. And if you stop there, it doesn't sound so ludicrous. But the next sentence is usually something about how because of DEI, unqualified people get jobs. And they use the extreme examples like at the very beginning of the administration when they laid off bunches of people from the FAA, and they talked about how you had people who were unqualified because of DEI in air traffic control towers and at the controls in airplanes. And it represents a total misunderstanding of how DEI works. Now, whether that misunderstanding was intentional or not, I guess you could debate. But, in terms of air traffic controllers, regardless of how the person was recruited, if DEI was used to recruit people, all of the people who end up in those jobs have to pass a qualifications test. There are not unqualified people flying planes and sitting in the air traffic control towers directing traffic who are underqualified and are only there because they are one of the groups that DEI protects. The concept is not only ludicrous, it's insulting. But you continue down that path that they're taking us, and getting rid of DEI for them wasn't just in terms of how we fill jobs and how we, decide who's a candidate for a job. They've taken it to the next level, and the next level is they're purging stories from government websites that have to do with women, that have to do with minorities. The most famous example of this, and it was one that then was reversed because of the severe backlash, was they took references to Jackie Robinson out of the website for the Naval Academy. And the article in question had to do with not just Jackie Robinson, but about athletes who left their sports to enlist in the military. It really didn't have that much to do with African Americans or DEI at all, but it was a story that focused on a black hero and was initially targeted for removal. And then, as I said, when people started to lose their minds over it, they backtracked. But as I mentioned in previous episodes, we're also seeing that things are being removed from the Smithsonian Institute and other government, quote unquote, controlled places to whitewash the information that's there. And they do this all under the heading of DEI because we're all supposed to be equal. And ignoring the past and ignoring reality is the best way to demonstrate that we're all equal. And that's this is tied in directly with woke, because a large portion of the people that they call, the woke idiots, or the people who supposedly suffer from the woke mind virus, are people who are against things like this, and people who promote stories about the reality of our past and how they can affect our future. So I guess we have to say, what do we do with the word now? Do we abandon it? Do we let them define it for us? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know any liberals who define themselves as woke. I mean, I shouldn't say none. I mean, I have seen bumper stickers here and there of people, saying that they're woke, but literally 98% of the time when you hear the word woke, it's someone on the right or someone who follows the thought processes of those on the right, are using it to disparage something somebody said or something somebody did or something somebody's planning. But I mean, to be woke is to be empathetic. We heard from Elon Musk, who apparently is eventually stepping down from his role at Doge, but we heard from him that empathy is a terrible thing. Those of us who they call woke don't believe that. To be woke is to be informed. To be woke is to be willing to change. And those things aren't insults. They're virtues. Even if it's framed as an insult when somebody's hurling it at you, it's either a misunderstanding or an actual active attempt to change the meaning of the word and make it an insult. My opinion on this is, for those of us who think we need to reclaim the word, or at least rob it of some of its power, is by actually living it as what it really means, by being the neighbors who show up to help folks, being the friends who listen to people who have problems, and by being the citizens who vote for candidates who are proposing things that will increase equity and justice. And, if that's woke, then I, for one, am willing to wear it like a badge of honor. It's not something that I ever consider an insult. In fact, when I hear people saying, oh, he's woke or she's woke or they're woke, all I think about is that I'm under their skin or we're under their skin. And that's fine. That's fine. But I think, by getting the message out there in action and in word, maybe we can rob them of such an easy and stupid method of hurling insults in our direction. So thanks for listening to my little rant about that. I'll sum up by saying words matter. And when a word like woke gets twisted into a slur, it deserves to be set straight, I think. Just for the sake of truth and being honest. As James Baldwin has a quote that says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And I think that sort of sums up the whole idea of woke, is that you're not going to ignore things that you see as problems. So stay woke, not as a meme, but as a mindset. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of this episode. My sincere thanks for listening in and listening to me rant. So for next episode, we'll have hot topics as usual, and then we'll have another deep dive. And next week's deep dive will be the MAGA echo chamber. A little bit about how right-wing media shapes reality. I have a pretty good feeling that's going to be an interesting one. So I hope you'll join me. Download that episode. Until then, once again, my name's Don Spielis. I want to thank you for listening to your Neighbor on the Left podcast. And until then, here's hoping you have the week that you voted for.